So, I don't have a lot of time. And it's been a while since I've been able to do this with you all. I was hoping to join you in San Antonio, and then I had a dance with COVID last fall. I thank my deputy, Dan Glasson, for doing a town hall with you last fall in San Antonio. Since then, we've had a boatload of changes. Not only have we had a boatload of changes, but we're looking at a restructuring, and if you will, a reposturing, a pivot to be responsive to what we have to do on behalf of the building. And because of the limited time, I'm going to get a couple sound bites into you now so you know. I want to introduce to you a couple people. The first person I want to introduce to you is Mary Catherine Ott. So Mary Catherine, if you could stand up. Mary Catherine joined us last week from the National Governors Association. I'm here today as well as tomorrow. If anybody would like to have a one-on-one, please see Catherine to schedule that with her. And I welcome anybody that wants to have a one-on-one. Okay? I also want to recognize Michelle Volkema, who's standing up. So we have at least $1.2, $1.3 billion in grants that are active. There's a lot of transacting, there's a lot of administravia, and previously we always had staff at these sessions so that you could come up and deal with whatever grant issues you may have. If you have any challenges, if you have questions, if you have concerns, please see Michelle. She'll get your contact information. We'll follow up with you as best we can. Okay? So, I'm going to follow what was said here by Congressman Garamendi with a graph. So, the CR. If you look down at that bottom line that says 0 going across, that's normalcy. That is starting the fiscal year with an appropriation that you then take the time to develop a spend plan. You go out with public announcements. You execute your budget. What we have had, unfortunately, is a new normalcy. I think Congressman Garamendi referenced that it started shortly after his arrival on the Hill. But that line that you see up there, and it could go on. It could go on prior to 2017. Those are the days it's taken to get a full enacted appropriation. And so the department basically has at least one hand tied behind its back for the period of time between that 0 line and the 200 line. And it complicates everything. And you're going to hear from me today a lot of the complications for us. Hopefully what you also hear from leadership that are speaking here, so I think Steve Marani spoke to it earlier. If Paul Kramer doesn't, you ask him about it tomorrow or on Wednesday when he's here. Ask him what happens under the CR and if there's anything you can do to help with the CR, because you ought to be telling your members they got to pass a budget. They have to pass an appropriation. Whether it's an omnibus or a straight line defense appropriation, the building is in a knot because of this. So what you see there in 2022 is May 7th. That's today. That's 43% of the way through the fiscal year. So we're not going to be 43% of the way through spending our money for FY22 because we don't really know what we're going to have to spend yet. There's a lot of need, there's a lot of expectations, but that's the dynamic we have. Now, I would also add, if Congressman Garamendi is correct in that we're going to see a further extension to this timeline, I think the longest we've ever seen is on this chart, and that's in 2017 where we did not have an appropriation until May. And so it complicates everything. And for us, it's still the same story. You know, how do you end up executing what could be, couple, $200, $300, $400 million budget over the course of 6 months, responsibly, with the due diligence that you're supposed to have. So, the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation. This slide is basically a picture of activity with our office. The President submitted a budget for $90 million. It's the first year that the President's budget submission included money for the Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Program, $50 million. It included about $15 million for what we have as overhead expenses, so staff salaries, rent, procurement activities that we use to support our capabilities. And then importantly, it included $25 million for our core programs of assistance. So those would be community use, industry resilience, compatible use, restructuring, alignment, and BRAC. We do have some of those, and we have some growth, believe it or not. What it didn't have was 45 million. So that 25 million is 20 million than what we would normally have because of defense-wide review reductions that were not restored inside the building. So we're in essence executing a program of assistance that's much reduced to start with. Now what's happened since the budget came out? I'm going to go over to the far right hand on the slide. The appropriators ended up plussing up the an additional 15 million for Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Program. So from the authorizers, presumably that would be 65 million for that program. They also ended up adding $3 million for additional personnel. So if you look at my organization, our organization, we have grown by leaps and bounds, and our personnel levels have remained stagnant. And so we're pretty much at the breaking point, and the authorizers and appropriators recognize that. So they're basically authorizing in this bill, this act, sufficient funds for us to add 15 more people to our organization. We're getting that from Congress. We're not getting that from the building. The building is moving around on it to get us that, but it had to come from the Congress. A couple other things that they did. For inside baseball folks, they codified us as the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation in FY21, but they failed to maintain our status as an independent field activity. What does that mean? Well, at the time, it meant we were part of OSD, and so we would become a bill payer for other needs in OSD. So they could peel people off, they could peel money off to pay other bills, and would basically be in a different pot of activity. And ADC, along with some other folks, immediately saw that, and quite frankly, right after enactment of the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act, there was a meeting and there was an agreement that we would be continued as an independent field activity, and this year's NDA, as it's called, maintains that. A couple other things that's worth noting. We have Installation Resilience Authority that's been expanded. And I'll speak to that in a little bit. And then we also have a report on the mitigation of noise that we work with OSD on, and the ACUS program, and that will come up here in a little bit too. Central to all of this is what the appropriators are doing. And that middle column, I'm not going to read through it because we're limited on time, but I will go to the next slide. This is the dynamic we have, okay? So we're under a CR. The CR would have us spending at FY21 levels. The House, if you take all the pluses that they've put into their bill, would add close to a little over $400 million to our account to execute most of it this fiscal year. The Senate, in a little bit different number, 95 million, gives us additional money to execute as well. Okay, so now you're sitting in my chair, and I'm looking at, okay, what do I execute to? Yes, there's a possibility that one of those two versions of the appropriation bill will be enacted. But if you're a comptroller, you don't bet on the come. And so what we've been doing is trying to peg to where we were in FY21 and then reaching forward into FY22. So what that translates to is what you see in front of you today. For FY22, this presents what we expect to be executing. If there's a conference that comes out of the appropriation process and we're given more money, this pie chart's going to change with the amounts, but this is what we're talking about. So the large chart on the left presents all the different program activities that we're engaged in except for the public schools. The public schools program would be an additional $300 million if we were going to add it. But right now what we're talking about is an additional, if you will, possibly up to $60 million for DSIP, $25 million for manufacturing communities, and I'll get into the nuancing on that. And we're working like the dickens to get out to execute towards these ends. All right? So at the end of the day, the president submits a $90 million budget, and as of today, we're trying to execute, in essence, $126 million. And without getting that Appropriation Act enacted, you know, there's a lot of pieces up in the air that we can't execute yet. So we're trying to move forward on things, and I'll get into the substance of that. So, by the way, I'm going to try to cut this off with about 5 or 10 minutes to spare so I can take questions from people. But I figured it was worthwhile getting into some of these program areas because a lot of you have an interest in this. So the first one I want to talk about is the Defense Community Infrastructure Pilot Program. Okay, and those of you who have not heard of it, it's a competitive process wherein we select through an inter-service OSD process proposals to carry out enhancements that benefit either family quality of life, installation resiliency, or military value. And last year we had language enacted that had us prioritize military value first, installation resiliency second, and family quality of life third. And we're moving right now with a basically what's called a notice of funding opportunity to get it published before the end of this month. So we're going to publish something without telling you how much money is available because we don't know how much of an appropriation we're going to have. But we want to get this out to everybody so you know what the criteria is, you know what you have to write it to, you know what we're going to be looking for, and we're going to make sure you have at least 90 days to respond to this. And so the uncertainty here is in that third bullet. In FY21, we had $60 million to spend on it. The president's budget this year had us at $50 million. If we stay under a CR for the remainder of the fiscal year, which I hope we don't, we would have $60 million. If we get a new appropriation enacted, we could have somewhere between $75 million and $90 million. Well, why that range? Because the House ended up adding about $25 million for the DSIP program in their bill, and the Senate ended up adding $40 million. And so they're going to, through conference, have to resolve the difference. We'll have to figure it out. And as I said, we're going to try to get this out there so everyone has 90 days to develop a proposal, and you're not going to be affected by this dynamic with where's an appropriation, when does it get signed into law. We'll catch up with the amount of funds that are available when they become known to us. Now, the last couple of years of DSIP have been interesting to say the least. And the next bullet talks about one of those areas that's been kind of tough to get our arms around. So we want projects to be construction ready. Construction ready means basically you can start turning dirt within 12 months of the award of the grant. That means you also, in most instances, you have to be on top of your NEPA, your environmental analysis. If there's a state environmental process, that has to be in parallel to that federal process. And not everybody knows that environmental process, so we get proposals where somebody says they've done something, and when we peel the layers back, we don't see it. And then it's a mad dash to try to catch up to be where they need to be. The availability of other federal and non-federal monies. So I have a term up there, not for shopping. So in a prior life, I used to underwrite projects for HUD, and there was a tendency by people to take a federal commitment of money and then go out and try to get other money beyond what they had in hand. Either looking for a better deal, looking for a different type of financial structure, or whatever. But we don't want to have the patience to wait for that, because this is basically, once we award the money, you only have 5 years to execute it. So we want to start pressing further to make sure if you represent that you have federal funds in a proposed project, we have to see what that money looks like. We have to see if there's a commitment to that money. There's ways of dealing with it, but we also have to be careful that we're not disadvantaging somebody else that actually has money in hand while we wait for somebody else to get either a federal award or to get another federal grant. And then we also, last but not least, permitting. And some of this is related to the environment. If you disturb shoreline, I won't get into it. But it's a very lengthy, entailed process. And I don't think sometimes people realize just how complicated it is when they put it on paper until they get into it. So, because of that, this time around, you're also going to see in the notice of funding opportunities some language that would suggest that we're going to do a competition on the proposals submitted. If those proposals that are submitted are invited for an application and that application comes in, and we find out the money's really not there, or we find out the project is different, this time around, rather than being locked into a definitive list that caps off with the money available, we'll go past the list that was originally selected, and we'll invite other applicants to make sure that we can execute as much money as we can for the proposals that were scored or rated by the panel. Now, having said that, this is an inter-service process with OSD. Military value does not work for this process, okay? The language in the authorization basically references BRAC 05 terminology and determinations. How long ago was BRAC 05, right? And so not only was it long ago, and not only maybe the services have updated that, but we want to make sure that if there's a newer basis for value, it's in the public domain. And the services haven't put anything else out in the public domain on it. And then on top of that, so the Army is frustrated because they have Guard and Reserve facilities that they never scored. And so we're trying to figure out, within reason, what we can do about that, but at the end of the day, there probably needs to be some tweaking to the military value component of this. And I can get into why we have it, but let me just stop there. I want to recognize a point of contact for this program. His name is Adam Wright. Is Adam here? So Adam joined us in the last 12 or 15 months. Adam is our activity lead for that program. If you have questions specifically about it, see him. And honestly, if you ask him a question he doesn't understand, he comes to us. Okay? Now let me just ask, are there questions about this before I go on? Because I know this is an important topic for some of you. Any questions? All right. I don't see any hands, so let me go on to the next area. So this morning you heard Steve Marani speak. And those of you that knew our prior organization, the Office of Economic Adjustment, we tended to be pretty insulation fixated. And I can tell you over the last few years, we have expanded to not just be insulation fixated, but manufacturing and industry, okay? And there was language not included in our core program or statute authority, but elsewhere in the NDA that we were asked to execute. It's become known as the Defense Manufacturing Community Support Program. It had been coordinated by a gentleman by the name of Mike Gilroy. Mike spent about 12 to 14 years with us. Mike recently left for greener pastures. And he left a very capable program, but what I want to do is reference back to Steve Marani. So keep in mind what he said this morning about what he was asked. What can communities do to help modernization? What can communities do to support moving past obsolescence? And this program actually is designed to help do so. And basically, what is it? Well, it funds critical skills, facilities, and research, small business support, basically to enhance what we call security innovation. And is done through consortia that are driven by you, state, local, university, not-for-profit entities, collaborating with your locals and your local installation or your local needs. And what we have done and what we will do now is we're going to issue a notice of funding opportunity that will also be released by the end of this calendar, this month. And we're going to try to prioritize spending in the areas that Steve talked about. We're hoping to see more proposals with consortia developed at the local level that speak to biotech, hypersonics, kinetic capabilities, energy storage and batteries, castings and forensic and forgings, basically metallurgies. The building has been releasing a lot of sound bites on where they think they're having to play catch up. And this program is a means to catch up. So last year we had a minimal amount of proposals for this program. We funded 5. That 5 was out of a number of proposals that were probably under 20. And we want to expand that base. We want to get people to think about this. We want people to come through the door to make themselves, avail themselves of this opportunity. We're expecting that we're going to have somewhere between 25 million. That's the amount of money that was available in FY21. And 30 million, which is the amount of money that the Senate Appropriations Committee has put into their version of the bill. And just like with the DSIP program, there'll be 90 days to submit a proposal. And we're going to recognize Hiwat Jabermiam. Hiwat, are you here? There you are. So Hiwat has heroically stood up to embrace this and manage this for us. So any questions about this program, about eligibility for this program, competing under this process for this program, please direct them to Hiwat. All right? The next area I want to speak to is what we're going to call economic diversification. So if you had come to see this on prior occasions, you heard a lot about industry resilience. And we're turning the page on industry resilience. Okay, where are we going? Well, part of this now is going to be in what we call diversification. What does this mean? It means that if you have a defense dependency, which basically is about 1.5 times the national average on defense spending locally, and we have ways to identify that for you and with you, that you can come to us for assistance. And we're hoping to issue a notice of funding opportunity to be published this spring. That opportunity should hopefully be published sometime in the April-May timeframe. And it's basically going to invite opportunities from you, for you, to enable you, to basically develop public services and investments, to basically help not just an installation-based need, but also an industry-based need that might exist locally. And what does that mean? So look at the next bullet. What happens if we no longer need portions of a facility because it's hosting a system that we just can't continue to spend money on? It enables you to look at the economics and to talk about facilities, the suppliers that are tied to that expenditure, to the maintenance contracts that are tied to it, and to come up with a strategy to position those dependencies to be responsive for the department in the next 3, 4, 5 years. Now, that's kind of a hard walk to make. It's harder to talk about it. But where I'm going with this is that first bullet up there. For those of you back in the 90s, when the last time was that the Defense Department really engaged in a divestment of sorts, and I'm not talking about the Budget Control Act divestments, I'm talking about where we said, you know, this is surreal, right? The crumbling of the Soviet Union. When we had a consolidation in different industries, what did we do? Well, we sought commercial opportunities for those defense expenditures so they wouldn't go away. So instead of defense spending paying for it today and tomorrow, you had a commercial purpose for that defense activity today so that tomorrow it was commercially and private sector driven. This program is moving past that, and it's defining diversification as positioning yourselves to be responsive to the future of the department's needs. And we're hoping that you're going to hear much more from DoD leadership on this as it comes forward, as it matures. Steve spoke a little bit about it today. We expect that this is going to become a very important program of assistance for everyone to consider. And we would expect this in FY22 is the first bite at the apple, but we're going to probably be seeing a lot more of this in the coming years. All right. And so I would also like to recognize Liz Comiente. So Liz is over here on the side of the room, standing up. Yeah, if you have questions about that, please ask Liz. So Liz not only is in charge of this program area, but she also manages our state-by-state spending report. So we produce a document that presents DoD spending on a state-by-state basis, as well as there's an addendum for the territories. And those expenditures are the dependencies that we're talking about. Those dependencies are the conversations I have with governors when they say, what can we do about what's being spent today so it's still there tomorrow? This is what you do. And the last bullet speaks to something I think everyone should be worried about. Okay, so before I go on, is anybody here from Maine? Anybody? So, if you're lucky, you can go on Defense News and read an article about Bath Iron Works. So Bath Iron Works has been getting DoD contracts from the Navy to build ships. And they've been falling further and further behind in the delivery schedule. Why is that? Because they have antiquated systems. They have a turnover in the workforce. They tried to compensate by hiring new people. They lost knowledge from a senior workforce, but they tried to catch up with the younger workforce. And so folks moved up there. And Bath, the CEO of Bath, is quoted in this article talking about several things. First, we regret we didn't pay more attention to cultivating and maturing a capable workforce when we had the opportunity. Now we're desperate. Secondly, what about the community? If you don't have adequate housing, schools, services, new employees don't want to stay. They'll come up there, they'll look at what you have, and if they don't like it, if somebody doesn't like the schools for the kids, or quite frankly, no one sees a house where they can stand in the middle of it and the match doesn't go out because the housing stock's so old. I used to live in those kind of houses when I was going to college. You're not going to attract the workforce. And so there's a lot of lessons learned from Bath Iron Works. There are others. So this program is also designed to enable you to go sit down with your local industry to understand their needs, understand what the workforce requirements are, and what can you do locally to try to respond to that. All right? I'll speak to some questions here in a little bit. The next area I need to speak to is installation resiliency. So I think Congressman Garamendi did a great job of setting the table on this. And if he hadn't done it, all you have to do is look at the articles, right? You saw how much Texas was affected by last year's cold weather. Everybody saw, quite frankly, everyone on the East Coast saw what Tropical Storm Sandy did to the East Coast. And you know, if you're on the West Coast, you saw what the earthquake did at China Lake. So, as I said, we got new authority to start looking at not just the planning for resilience, but also the construction of resilience projects. And we're going to come out with a NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity notice here in the springtime. Quite frankly, we're working with the General Counsel right now to understand what the new language is versus the existing language and how can we parallel those two to make them effective for your needs. But basically, it's looking at what's up there. How do you go out and engage utility vulnerabilities, transportation access, wildfire risk and mitigation, et cetera? We're also trying to align with what the department has in its mission assuredness concerns. So with all due respect, if an installation or a community says, we need more than one power line, that may be true. But we also have to look at what does that installation do. And if in the grand scheme of things, there are other installations with one power line that are much more critical to mobilization and forward power projection than these other ones, those may get prioritized, and we have to sort through that dynamic. All right. Now, we also want to tie this program to existing energy resiliency plans and overall master plans that the services have been directed to come up with. So there is a genuine partnering that's supposed to occur with the military, and they come up with something at the local level. Our coordinator for this program is Margette Myers. Is she here by chance? Her contact information is up here, so if you'd like to ask more questions, please do so. And again, as I said, I'm going to stop here in a little bit to ask if there are any other questions. So you're going to see a shift. So I'm not talking about compatible use today. I'm talking about installation resiliency. And just like in the previous case, I'm not talking about industry resilience. I'm talking about diversification. Those are major shifts for us. Those are the shifts that we will walk you through. Those are where we see the preponderance of need to be with the department. And I think over the course of the next several weeks, you're going to see the department messaging that that's where the department wants to be going as well. All right. I mentioned $300 million for public schools on military installations. This is a very large portfolio for us. Some of you have publicly owned schools on military bases. And for whatever reasons, either their condition and or capacity needs are not being taken care of. And they've ended up on a prioritized listing by the Secretary to fund improvements. So we're working to fund improvements down that list. And for those of you that might be interested, if we end up with $300 million, that small bullet up there is mentioning Nellis Air Force Base, Joint Base Pearl Hickam, Morris Hill at Fort Riley, Altus, and a couple other facilities. If we get an appropriation, it's at $300 million. We'll be inviting in proposals from those schools. If there's additional money that comes into the appropriation, and there could be, we'll be inviting more schools to apply for the program, and we'll be carrying out more projects to improve school conditions. Last one I want to speak to and then open it up for questions is community noise mitigation. So the FY21 appropriation gave us $75 million to go out and talk to local officials, the FAA, and the military departments to understand noise and installations with fixed-wing aircraft. And we identified over 200 facilities where there was fixed-wing aircraft with noise levels at the 65 decibel level or higher. We went out through a Federal Register announcement, and we ended up receiving well over 1,700 comments on what could be done about the noise. So this program was designed to actually develop and assist communities to mitigate noise. So what happened, and 37 of the 200 installations were represented in those comments. I think what's happened though is, and again, this is a victim of the appropriation process, the appropriators have two very different directions now that came up in the FY22 bills that they have. So the House would reset the money, so keeping $75 million for us to execute by having us execute through 2025, and not to just include fixed-wing aircraft, but rotary craft. And we're supposed to report to Congress on the number of facilities that have those rotary craft within a year of enactment. The Senate would pull everything back and just give us $5 million to be executed in 2 years. So very different approaches. So we went out, got public comments, and we stopped. We stopped, and I spoke quite extensively with the appropriating staff, with the authorizing staff, and we're waiting. And so when whatever gets enacted, we'll, on that last bullet, resume consultations with OSD, the military departments, and the FAA. We'll come up with a federal program construct so that money can be competed, and then we'll end up executing that program to the extent we need to. The contact for that program is Mr. Scott Spencer, and Scott's sitting over here, if you could stand up, Scott. So if there are any specific questions on that program, Scott's the person to see on it. Now, having said that, and I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close to my running out of my time here, are there questions that I can speak to about anything I raised, anything I didn't raise, or any gripes about anything that we've done that you're not very happy with?
So Dave Smith, the director of the production and flight test facility at Plant 42. So first off, thank you, Schools at Edwards. Awesome collaboration. Hey, we're a different sort of egg. We're only building all the B-21s and the midsections, all the F-35s in the world, but we're largely contractor run. So when I reach back to various offices, I tend to not feel the love, because the 12,000 contractors aren't looked at as 12,000 military personnel, but they're delivering combat capability to this country every day that's essential. And when I look back to things working closely with the city of Palmdale, like a little bit of love and affection on defense access roads programs, as when you bring in that kind of mission growth, my contractors simply can't get to work. It seems that I fall on deaf ears. Is there something we can do to open that aperture a little bit and look at this more creatively as an overall instrument of the nation's defense?
Right. So you're talking about a critical portion of what you mentioned to be the nation's defense. And to date, there never has been a great answer, because the private sector has always been viewed as you're simply, you're making the buck off DOD when we need something. So, on good days, you're getting a buck. On rainy days, you got to spend a little to make a little. And that has predominantly been the posture that they've had. I think we're getting to the point now with critical capabilities and with other areas of need. Those areas I mentioned on that one slide earlier, where the department is revisiting what can be done in collaboration with industry to shore it up. So the NDAA that was enacted in FY 22, I guess, it was noteworthy for a couple other things. So it created a Assistant Secretary for Energy, Environment, and Installations. And you're going to hear from Paul Kramer, I think, on Wednesday. And Paul is assuming that role along with another hat. By the way, there's too many, dual, triple, quadrupled hats that people are wearing. But it did something else too. It established in writing the need for an Assistant Secretary for Industrial-Based Policy. And so the building has their sleeves rolled up, and they're working extensively to identify what are the critical capabilities, what should we be doing to support those capabilities, and how might we be able to work with states and communities to support those capabilities going forward. And I'm hoping that when the budget is released, you're going to see some additional information about what can be done in that regard. I think the department's leadership is going to also be messaging on that. And, we can't get in front of the budget drop. We can't say what's going to be in there. But I think if you take a look at that diversification slide, that's a really good idea for trying to engage with industry. Now, having said that, is there anything that will compel an industry to work with you on it? Is there anything that will compel an industry to say, we should be putting some money into this with you? I think you're going to almost have to look at, well, you can either do it now, or you can look at what's happening up at Bath or some of these other areas where they didn't do the investing today, or they didn't think about what had to be done today, and they can't get people to come tomorrow because the services aren't there, or something else is lacking, or the technology. And you know, the elephant in the room on all this stuff is the workforce. So you got to train the workforce, but then you have to retain the workforce. And I think there's capabilities in that program of assistance, and I don't really want to talk more to it just because I think the budget drop will speak more to some of that. Okay? Any other questions? Last call. He's got the hook out. Did Tim send you out with the hook?
Real quick, the schools program, is there any funding available for schools that aren't inside the fence line but outside, but that support the base children?
There is only money available for schools that have been rated by the Secretary of Defense. And the Secretary of Defense rated about 160 plus schools. And that list is from worst to best. And so whatever money becomes available immediately goes to the next worst school, and then we move on. So if you have a particular facility or a particular school, the best thing you can do is look at that list to see if it's on it and where it lies. And I didn't mention it, is Sig Chitry here? So Sig runs that program for us. His contact information on that slide would be good to follow up with as well. If you can't reach him, I'm going to call out Dan Glasson, if you'd stand up. So Dan handles all the program activities right now for us. And in Sig's absence, Dan is a good person to go to on it. Okay?
Patrick, thank you so much. It's always great to have you here.